Here for the Kiku show before. The piece of art that you see here is done by the same artist who did the bamboo sculptures out in the plaza. And he's a master of the art of flower arranging, otherwise known as ikebana. And in this particular display, he's used native materials. I think with the assistance of recent storms, perhaps made it a little easier to find some of the branches, and arranged them in a very aesthetically pleasing fashion. As you, of course, realize, there's no guidebook to how to arrange in ikebana style. There are, but really it's an aesthetic sense that you have to develop yourself. And I don't think there are too many of us looking around at the branches and other debris on the ground that can conceive of the product we see here, which is held together with screws and wire, and which was constructed with the assistance of volunteers here at the garden. The master would stand back, eye it, move it there, and that's right. It's just something that grows as you proceed. The bamboo structures out on the plaza were substantially larger than this and created a different feeling than this particular one. But this has its own charm, I think you'll agree. The display is in that wing over there, so we can continue around, if you will. Let's try not to block the area too much. It's not going to be easy. This show is going to come in 2 chapters. And I call your attention to the Kingai display of chrysanthemum over there. This is just a sample of what's to come. The reason they're not here is that they're not in bloom as yet, as you can see. But this is the height of the art of chrysanthemum display. There are several patterns of display. This one, Kingai, stands for cascade. Those of you who are Japanese will excuse my mispronunciations, or correct me if I'm wrong. And there's Giku or Zikuri. You'll have to come back October 1 to see that display. And the problem with putting on a chrysanthemum show, Giku, for example, had 2 full sets of displays. The flowers only last for a couple of weeks, so you would have to manipulate the time of bloom by actually covering. It's a whole art in and of itself to get them ready at a specific time. The ones that are now in the Nolan greenhouse will be ready by October 1st, and they will be brought in here. And it will be quite a different looking show. What you're looking at there represents work that may go 6, 8, 10, 11 months, taking 1 or 2 cuttings from certain types of chrysanthemums and discarding the selected ones, tying the selected ones back. Tedious, labor intensive. I know because I've had the privilege of playing with it a little bit, and it takes not only skill but tremendous patience to develop one of these displays. there are no less than 13 classes of chrysanthemums. Classes, meaning certain flower shapes and sizes. We all know spider mums. Who doesn't know those? There are large and there are small spiders. There are pom-pom mums. Some of the classes depend upon whether the individual petals are incurving or outcurving. No need to get into that in detail, but it is a whole art in and of itself. And it was first brought to the garden here 5 or 6 years ago through a collaboration with Shinjuku Goyen, which is the National Garden of Japan in Tokyo. And a couple of people were sent over to help train, and there is a very small staff of people skilled in chrysanthemum display who have carried on the tradition. I have a hunch that Kiku may be back next year, but please don't quote me on that. In the meantime, we can at least get a sample of what this art entails. An interesting reality is that very few people have the experience of the time to fool with chrysanthemums, which, by the way, are the national flower of Japan, and the Emperor's seal features a chrysanthemum. And so the breeders out there commercially have developed mums which will hold their shape and which require minimal pruning. And I heard someone refer to them as Belgian mums. Be that as it may, what you're going to see in mums here today are simple forms. They aren't the complex, tedious ones that I've just been describing to you. Any questions so far? Okay. Annual. I take it back. There are, it depends on the climate you're living in. Around here. Around here they can be perennial. Many of them are. But they will often die back, and they have to be cut back in the spring to get them to look halfway decent. Japanese anemone. Very beautiful flower, and those of you who garden know that your selection of flowers that put on a show in the fall is limited. And Japanese anemone is one of the tried and true varieties, and this is a low-growing variety. There are some very tall-growing varieties. On your right and left are the Belgian mums that I've been referring to. Here's a plant that I love, and it sure looks like it wouldn't grow around here, but in fact it does. And in point of fact, the growing conditions in Westchester County are not too dissimilar to those which you would encounter in Japan, at least depending on the main island. Mahonia is a holly-looking plant, but it's not, and its native habitat is Asia.
Is that Japanese anemone a perennial?
Yes, yes. Japanese anemone is a frequently used perennial and highly reliable for fall color. For those of you who have ever been to Japan, I'm sure you came away with an appreciation and a wonder at the aesthetic, which, if anything characterizes it, is simplicity. It's not cluttered. The English garden style is you fill every square inch of place with something. But Asian, and particularly Japanese style, which was derived centuries ago from Chinese, is very mannered and very simple. There is much use of grasses. And in general, in the States today, you see a lot more grasses than ever used to be. This is one called miscanthus, and the flowering is a little bit anemic here today, but when they are massed and they flower late in the season, they put on a beautiful show. You see the anemones on the left side here are a little bit taller, and they're not quite in bloom as yet. A word about bamboo. Bamboos come in two broad categories. The tall bamboos, and you'll see some examples in the back, and clumping bamboos. Those of you who garden will surely be aware that you must not plunk bamboo anyplace, not unless you want to inherit a garden full of bamboo. And the more mannered bamboos are the clumping bamboos that you see here, genus Vargesia and several others. In terms of grasses, I showed you Miscanthus. There are sedges as well. And Carex is a genus name for sedge. And for those who are interested, there was a little poem, which has in it the line, sedges have edges. And if you look at something that looks like a grass, but you're wondering is it a grass or a sedge, just have a little feel of the plant and you'll feel the edges catch on your skin. You know it's a sedge, not a grass. Sedges have edges. How many of you know about beautyberry? Calicarpa. I wasn't aware that it was very much used in Japanese gardens. And this one is not doing its stuff at the moment because it has little purplish blueberries. There are some white-berried varieties, and the birds love them. They strip these shrubs, and if you have a sort of a native garden, you don't want to be surprised if you don't see Calicarpa coming up here and there, courtesy of the birds. When birds excrete the fruits they eat, you are blessed by numerous new plants in time. Just like squirrels plant oak trees for you. Buxus, boxwood, it's a plant that's used in most formal settings. It can be sheared. It tolerates a wide range of conditions of light. It's a much used plant. Texture and color are important aspects of any garden, and particularly the Japanese garden. The form is also another factor, and here you see simple chrysanthemum forms. Obviously, we are early. You see that they are just coming into bloom. And the plants can be forced by raising the temperature and increasing the light to manipulate the time of bloom, as I've already mentioned to you. Very interesting color in a sedge. Brownish color. You wouldn't think that would be exciting. But that illustrates the principle of contrast. The more contrast you have in a garden, the greater the interest, very often. More plantings of boxwood. Here's another grass. I neglected to mention to you that bamboo is a grass. It's a variety of grass. And the unique aspect of bamboo is that in many of the varieties, the latent period between bloom can exceed 100 years. So you have a clump of bamboo. If you're around long enough to see it flower, that will be the end of that clump. It dies once it flowers. Very unusual plant, and probably one of the most useful plants in the world in terms of what you can do with it, including many floors today that are made out of bamboo, as I'm sure have seen. This is a plant, Tricertis, called toad lily. I don't know how it gets the name, but the flower, if you look at the individual flower, is very reminiscent of the orchid. It's a full flowering plant. Again, a small group of plants that put on a show in September and even October. My favorite grass of all is this one right here that sort of droops. That's Japanese forest grass, Hakone Cloa. It comes in several varieties, including all gold, for example. And when you mass it, put it in a clump, it's beautiful in terms of the texture that it creates. I think you'll agree. More Japanese anemone. Japanese burnet. I'm always amused when I see people walking around a beautiful garden such as the New York Botanic, and they're busy taking notes. And they see this and they see that, oh, I've got to have that. The first thing they discover when they go to the nursery is he may very well never have heard of it because you get exotic material. The second is that what looks great in an established garden grown by professionals may very well not be the case with you. And this was my personal experience with Burnett. I couldn't get it to look remotely like that. It was scraggly and all over the place. But this texturally puts on a very nice show. Oh, the question was, how do you get the chrysanthemums to grow so tall? Every one of them is wired, every branch and tied. That's the tedious part of it, and the skill comes in knowing which side branch to take off and what to tie to what. There's one variety that is going to be here in a few weeks called Ovifuli, and it's one plant with trained into 3 branches, and it's brought up each of these branches in its own support. And at the top is the single mum, which is grapefruit size. It's gorgeous, gorgeous. But imagine the care that has to go into creating that kind of a display.
Just honestly, how many plants are into one of those?
What are we doing?
Those tall chrysanthemum display.
The tall chrysanthemum displays?
How many plants are in?
It's not going to be more than 2 or 3.
Wow. Right.
And oftentimes single, and they're started as cuttings from a mature plant. You know, I've watched that. It's just amazing to see the progress week by week. Of course, there are several hundred varieties of Japanese maple. You have a few of them displayed here, here, and here. They come in all habits, vertical, spreading, all colors, even variegated. The house that you see as part of this display will look a little bit more impressive when it comes into bloom, which will take probably another week. And there it is. It's, at least in terms of the geometry of it, it's interesting, but it'll be much more beautiful when it blooms. Here you see the all gold variety of Hakone Chloa, Japanese forest grass. You see a weeping maple there contrasted to an upright right over here. You also see another grass-like plant which is much used. It's called liriape. What that little bed of liriape suggests is that those of you who are gardeners, when you go into the nursery and something catches your eye, never get 1. Get odd numbers, start with 3. And if you want liriape to look like anything, it's got to be massed like that. It is interesting that it's not doing much by the way of blooming. It's got a very nice and attractive bloom. We can go this way. I was surprised to see cycads on display here myself. I didn't know that they were grown in Japan. Cycad is a palm-type plant that goes back a couple of 100 million years. It's been around a long time. It is not hardy for the most part around here. You do have to bring it inside if you want to grow it in Westchester County. Over here, the plant that I call beautyberry, Calicarpa, with the bluish purple berries. You see that it's not quite ready, but that's what they look like. Puts on a beautiful show when it flowers. In grasses, you get an interesting opportunity for contrast. This is called black mondo grass. And you see how it's being used here for a nice color contrast. Over here, hosta, there are not too many hostas that would be blooming at this time of year. And if this is Plantagenet, is it? What do they say? It's one of the few fragrant hostas. Most hostas, plantain lily is its common name, do not have a fragrance. We're looking at a couple more Kengai displays. Those of you who have seen the Kiku exhibit may recall that these were displayed only in sheltered booths here and there around the reflecting pools. Of course, the last thing you want to have happen is a hailstorm when you set one of these displays out and have the work of almost a year disappear under your eyes. One of the interesting realities of gardening, particularly in this part of the world, is the gardener is often faced with too much shade, not enough sun. There are lots of materials that will grow in the shade, but they, generally speaking, don't offer the attraction of pretty flowers. So you look for texture and color, and blue star juniper right here is an example. That blue-green color is very striking. Behind it is something called heavenly bamboo, only it's not a bamboo at all. It's Nandina domestica. And the interesting thing about Nandina, and it comes in dwarf varieties, which you're looking at here, and very tall varieties, is that the new growth often comes out reddish in color, and the whole plant turns a beautiful red color in the fall. And that is the beauty of the fall flowers of Japan. As you see it in Japan, the maples in particular are absolutely stunning in the variety of colors they will assume just before leaf drop. Here are I mentioned to you the clumping bamboos. You'll see more of them. And if you want to plant bamboo, take a look at how this one is planted. You'll see that it's actually sitting in a pot in the ground. Here are the tall bamboos. I grow bamboo in my garden, and it's an absolute curse because even when you put out plastic liner or walls around it, it is more clever than we are, and it manages to get out. And the rhizomes of tall bamboos are something approaching steel in their consistency. So it's a beautiful plant, but it's got to be used with great discrimination. I'm not familiar with this plant here, but the flower is certainly interesting looking. Rather scraggly plant otherwise, but the flower is interesting. Another comment about gardening in general, be careful when you plant ivy, if anyone has ever tried it. It has a mind of its own, and it is not easy to get rid of once it gets out of hand and gets established. You notice that the Japanese anemones come in a variety of colors. Belgian mum. There's a whole story here about camellia, which is not a hardy plant around here, but which is a beautiful flower. Another sedge on your right, beautiful example of texture. And when you alternate a grass with reddish and greenish with a yellow and greenish, you create visual interest automatically. Now, the display is actually limited to these rooms in the garden, but I want you to feel free to wander. There are 11 biomes in this conservatory, biomes meaning rooms which replicate different climates with the flora that goes with those particular climates. You see there a variety of Nandina, which is tall. Nandina can go, you see it there, it's up at 8-9 feet. And it can go taller than that. We work our way back around here. It is very important. A lot of the skill of Japanese garden design is knowing what plants will behave themselves and what will not. And Falopia japonica, right here. What could be prettier? It's got an interesting little flower. It's got a variegated leaf. Very striking, but very labor intensive, because by the second and third season, you're going to have a lot of Falopia japonica in places where you don't want Falopia japonica. Some plants that are unruly spread by underground rhizomes, which is what this one does, and others just drop their seeds, and so you get little seedlings everywhere. And as a gardener, it behooves you to know which plants are easy to manage and which become a real pain to control later on. This is a beautiful flower. I'm not familiar with it, but gentian, I've never tried to grow it. What's interesting about it, the color and the shape, the bell shape, resemble bellflower, campanula, but the beauty of this particular plant is that the flower faces up, and campanula droops down. Not as easy to see. Chorus, very nice grass, nice texture. And here again is the calicopa, or beautyberry, which hasn't turned color yet. I love the variegated Japanese iris. It's a beautiful iris display outside and to the right called the lady's border. An iris is another plant where you take on an obligation when you plant it, because irises have to be lifted and divided no more than every couple of years, otherwise they don't flower well and they're all over the place. Here's a little closer look at Tricertus. I said toad lily. It's got very nice texture. There are several varieties, and as you look at each individual flower, you begin to understand why it's called swamp orchid, because the little flowers do look like orchids. I saw someone looking at the cascading Lismachia here. This is a foolproof plant. If you're into container planting and you want something to cascade outside the container, you can't lose on that one. All you have to do is keep cutting it back because it goes and goes. Well, folks, I've pretty much said my piece. Are there any questions? Oh, I didn't mislead you. It's a half hour. You're very welcome. Please enjoy. Feel free. There's much else going on around the garden.
So you remember the last two places we went, right?